Hello and welcome to Prophetic Voices, Preaching and Teaching Beloved Community, a podcast from the Episcopal Church's Office of Reconciliation, Justice, and Creation Care, where we explore the season and the lectionary through the lens of social justice. I'm your host, Reverend Shaniqua, Staff Officer for Racial Reconciliation, and I'm so glad you could join us. In this episode of Prophetic Voices, we'll be discussing the Easter Vigil lectionary. Our lovely guests this week are the Reverend Dr. Ann Lagman, who is from Batavia, Illinois, and serves as the missioner for Asiamerica Ministries for the Episcopal Church. She likes hanging out with family and friends and is passionate about ministry in and with the Episcopal Church. The Reverend Canon Shana McCauley, who serves Trinity Episcopal Cathedral in Portland, Oregon as the Canon Vicar. She has been a priest for 18 years and is passionate about helping people find God in the extraordinary and ordinary. She is married to her husband Ryan and they have 3 sons, a dog, and a bunch of fish. And last but not least, the wise and wonderful Rachel Ambasing, who is from National City, California and serves as the missioner for community vitality and diversity for the Episcopal Diocese of San Diego. She likes music, reading contemporary reimaginings of the Pride and the Prejudice, and watching pro wrestling. She is passionate about the gospel being expressed in ways that are diverse, authentic, and embodied. Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for willing to be guests on the podcast. I know our listeners love to hear you all, and I know I do too. What's important to keep in mind for Easter or Easter Vigil this year specifically?
You've got all Asian women, so none of us are ever going to start talking. It's just going to be long pauses. For me, the thing this year that really stands out is that God works in unimaginable ways. It doesn't make any sense. It feels hopeless. And then God does God's thing. And we get really worried about and really hyper about how could this be? And this moment is absolutely lost and forget everything. And then God shows up, and I feel like God is always answering the question of why, and we're always stuck on how.
I would also add, like the importance of letting ourselves embody the tension of the Easter Vigil. I think, like there's so much power in gathering while we are in the grief of things, right? Because like growing up, I remember Easter as just being like a very manic, very like exclamation point heavy kind of Toys R Us filled, like brilliant day of like, it's like very hallmarky kind of joy. But I think I don't know of one person who isn't feeling the tension of the world right now. So I just feel like leaning into the honesty and the beauty of being able to gather together in the grief of the grief that is part of the resurrection, right? Um, that feels very real to me this year.
To me, I guess this year and actually probably every year, it's about hope and liberation. And I don't think we are giving away any spoilers. We know that Jesus is, going to rise from the dead. We have that advantage. So there's something in me that while we sit in that liminal space, that it's important to continue to remember that hope and our joy even within that liminal space.
What liturgical suggestions do you have for this service?
We read so many of these readings in the dark that I feel like this year we should do it in the light. Like we change that order around so that these stories, in a sense, are brought to light. Kind of, well, not kind of, but remind us of that hope, of that liberation, of faith in the story of Christ.
Joanne, what have you done previously for the dark and light? Do you do the whole vigil in the dark, or do you do following Easter service, or how does that work?
So we did a full Easter service when I was a rector, and it was a small church, and we lit a fire anyway. It's been not so popular to do a whole Easter Vigil service for a whole reason. And the first year I did it, I think there were maybe like 6 people, but we lit that fire anyway. And then the next year it was 11. And then we started inviting the churches around us, Episcopalian or not. And all of a sudden, the next year we had 40.
Wow.
And then I left, but I hope that they continue to do the Easter Vigil service. Oh, I didn't answer your question. So we read the stories by candlelight.
And then did you have some dramatic moment from that, like by candlelight moment that became light, or?
Yes, we turned on all the lights and rang the bells and started to read the gospel.
We've been doing the last several years an Easter Vigil, well, the last couple years in the outside. So we do the dark part around a big fire. It's not usually nearly as big as we hope. Like, we hope for this big fire, and we're usually nursing this alcohol fire that we keep trying to get to go. But we've done it outside. It's been cold, but so far it hasn't like poured down rain on us, which is always likely in the Pacific Northwest. And then we process into the cathedral. My favorite moment in this service is we have this organ that will do this, where our organist plays this rumbling earthquake feel, like it's the sound that you can feel in your body. And it's this building, and all of a sudden, when we time it right, the lights turn on, and we have this scrim behind the altar. So the scrim drops, the lights come up, and the music, and we turn into this big alleluia, and it's this really big dramatic thing. I've never been in a place that does it like this. And so the first year, which was 21, for me, the first year was 21, when this happened, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so big and grand and fabulous. And to me, that is maybe the best moment of the entire church year.
My Enneagram 4 is like delighting at the remembrance of the pageantry of Easter Vigil. Because I've definitely been in some services where like the lights come on and it's like this big dramatic like hallelujah. But I was also going to echo on the holding the service outside, but that's also because I'm in San Diego. So I recognize that not everyone is going to have the privilege of doing so.
Right.
But I think like my favorite Easter Vigil service was one where we had the entire service outside, mostly because we had to, because it was like 2021 or 2022. So we're talking like deep pandemic. But we were all gathered around the campfire, and then we, after we took seriously the songs. So in addition to the readings, we had a whole bunch of singing, and it just reminded me of like I'm Filipino, so in Filipino culture, we do a lot of singing, a lot of acoustic singing around the campfire. So there's just something very like familiar and grounded, and like something accessible about that service where it felt intimate, I think is the word. So I think if I could recreate that service with others, of course, this year, like that really, some kind of intimate space feels really, really good.
Well, I like all these ideas, and I love that transition from darkness to light. I also think that maybe this year, I wonder what it would be like to be in the light. Kind of like you talked about, Joanna. I wonder if that's more like symbolic of like our church maybe has been quiet for too long, and maybe we need to be out in the public with our beliefs and with our values and with our love for our neighbor. And I could totally see that. So according to the rubrics, right, you have to read for sure the Exodus story and one other one. What do these stories represent to you? And which one is your favorite? I can share just from my own, like, as Indian people, especially when the snow is on the ground, that's our time to do storytelling often. And so we would talk about like, we're sharing stories, and it's our history. Sometimes it's our culture. Sometimes it's our belief system. And so sometimes I think of that as like that's kind of what's happening in that moment, is that shared storytelling. And I could totally see, at least, I haven't tried this yet, that's a new idea, sharing one of our traditional, like maybe they have the creation story from the Bible, maybe we share our traditional Lakota creation story as part of that. I could see that happening. That'd be really interesting. Anyway, but I think that's kind of what it represents to me. And my favorite, I really like Noah's Ark, but I think it's just because as a child, that's one of the stories you heard all the time. But
I love the drama of the dry bones. That story of that's the thing that really speaks to me this year. It's always my favorite. The thought of the clinking of the bones, and I can feel and hear and see that story. So all of that story really speaks to me. But this year I've been thinking, as I said before, about the how and the why, and how desperate and the intense despair that is the absolute hopelessness of the Valley of the Dry Bones. There's nothing there. I mean, they're all bleached, and we're not bringing anything back to life. They're dust. It's nothing. And even in the midst of that, God can breathe new life into the driest places, the impossible places. And I'm trying really hard not to feel total despair in this moment. And the political culture and the political moment that we're in feels, in my worst moments, it feels hopeless. It feels like, oh my God, how do we ever get out of this moment in a way that that isn't absolute apocalypse.
It's that reading from Genesis, the first one, Genesis 1. Every time I hear, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters, I always feel within myself like this whoosh, this, that movement of the Holy Spirit over the water, as if this dove is jumping over the water and then creating as that movement happens. And that whoosh too, ties into that breath that's the Holy Spirit, that ruach, and that creation that affirms that all persons and all things were created good. And so affirming that, I think, is really important in this time where there is such division. And unfortunately, that division is about people who are differently able, people who are LGBTQIA plus, and this message that we are not created good or in the image and likeness of God. This also reminds me of something that Valerie Kaur said when we talk about the waters, is that perhaps we are in a time of, let me get that quote right, about the darkness of the tomb versus the darkness of the womb.
Right.
And that always, the waters, the waters of birth, always hit me that way. And that perhaps, this darkness, though full of death and perhaps despair, really can become, or that God will make generative, not to downplay any trauma or difficulty.
Exodus is really hitting me, particularly the piece where Moses is like, do not be afraid, stand firm, and like the Lord's got you, basically. And then like the next paragraph, the Lord is like, why are you calling out to me? Like, tell the Israelites to move forward. In other words, like, the Israelites need to be part of this movement too. Like they need to they need to involve their bodies in their own liberation. And there's this saying amongst community organizers. I wish I could remember the legend who probably said this first, but we are the leaders that we are looking for. Like so often we look for like the magic one, right? The magic one that can solve everything for us or that can move us into liberation. But truly, it's dependent on all of us, right? It's dependent on all of us. Even though God is the one who's going to part the Red Seas, we each have to be able to move our bodies forward or to help our communities move their bodies forward, right? If there's
Right.
someone who's going to be left behind.
So let's talk about Exodus a little bit. You mentioned, Rachel, kind of what stood out for you. What stands out for the others in that Exodus story?
What Rachel said initially, too, with being part of this movement ourselves. There's a part of me that thinks about how I think it's attributed to Lila Downs, that unless your liberation is tied up in mine, then forget it, because our liberation should be I don't know, liberating together.
Mm-hmm.
And so allyship has been something that's been on my mind a lot lately, and how both people of color can use our gifts to affect our liberation, and how we can partner in relationship with our white brothers and sisters or siblings to affect our liberation together, because one group trying to be the salvation for the other is not, I believe, how we are to be together here as we form God's kingdom. But there's one other thing today, just as we speak, that I think about when you said moving our bodies, Rachel, and I think about Miriam dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And that dance of joy, and that dance of freedom. And I'm remembering a time when I attended the Filipino convocation as a missioner, when the Igorot members of the Igorot tribe were dancing in praise. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
I feel pretty grateful. I was born in the U.S., but thanks to my parents and my uncles, they really worked really hard to make sure that their descendants kind of learned the dances of our ancestors. Um, but there is something about there's this feeling that I get when I am dancing with my aunties and uncles. Like there's this sense of pride, but it feels deeper than that. Like it feels like a pride that's not like ego driven, but that's almost like ancestor driven. I feel like I don't know if any of you all watched Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance, but there is a moment when he's taking these
Mm-hmm.
steps right as Not Like Us starts, where he has like this kind of swagger to him. Even as Serena Williams was like sea walking, there's like this sense of like I don't know, like a cultural kind of rootedness that feels divine because it feels like something that's connected to something bigger than just the individual. And I feel like I see that whenever the gongs start to play. There's always this moment when okay, so in Igorot dances for patong is what it's called. The men typically start by playing the gongs, and then the women will dance alongside them. But whenever uh, there's always this moment when the men kind of start to sync up their gongs, and then once they have it going, like you just see their shoulders kind of pull back a little bit, and you see them stand up like a little bit straighter, and like everyone just starts like vibing together. So it's incredible to watch. It's almost like the spirits like the communion of saints, if we want to
Mm-hmm.
use, you know, Episcopal language, is like almost coming through them to express themselves in a collective, bigger way.
That syncing up of the gongs, just, this unity in moving together to affect our liberation and to um, be gathered as God's people in that spirit, really hits me at this point in time when I think about our current context.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we put together last fall, no, a year ago fall, a conference for Asian, this is really specific, Asian women priests who were 5 or more years from retirement. And when we started talking about it, I was like, are there more than 3 of us? This is so cool. I'm so excited. But, and there were several. And so as we were getting ready, we called together, we picked a handful of women who were accomplished and in different ways. And so there were 3 of us who were organizing and 3 people who we had asked to be keynoters. And so we started conversation to try to get people, try to get those seeds planted so that when they come and speak, they have something to talk about, right? They have thought about some stuff. And we were on a Zoom call and it was like, so blah, blah, blah. And then everybody mutes. Yep. Okay. Eventually we started calling on people because it's like, okay, well, 40, 60, 80 seconds of silence is a long time. And it was like that when we were in person too, where Asian women are socialized in a particular way. And so to see all of us who are socialized a particular way lean out instead of leaning in. I mean, that's a thing that I think about. This is a little rabbit hole, but when we talk about wanting people of color at the table, I always feel like there's this expectation that people of color will lean in and act like white people and lead like white people. And my feeling is always like, how about you people lean out? Like if you want us at the table as our authentic selves, then you have to invite us to the table the way we are and not expect us to be the way you are.
Mm-hmm. And we can't be the only one of us at the table either,
Yep.
right? Like that's always frustrating.
Yep, absolutely.
I think I try and tell people that in like when I'm talking about like at least for a lot of Indian folks, our like waiting time, like if somebody asks a question, there's like a little moment that we have to wait before we can speak. And I think ours is a little longer, maybe not than yours, it sounds like, but and different tribes is a little longer depending on which tribe you're from, right? And so we're kind of cognizant of that usually when we come together as Native people. But like if you're like with groups that are from the East Coast, they like interrupt each other and you just never get a word in. And I'm just like getting more and more frustrated as I'm waiting to talk. And I'm like, wait, I have something to say. And it's like, do I need to raise my hand or, whatever you have to do to kind of get in there.
Well, and I think particularly Asian women I think Asian people are socialized to be really communal. This is true for other cultures too. It's not just Asian people, but and particularly Asian women are socialized to wait, to invite others into the conversation. And that means that if you have all Asian women, it can take a while for somebody to jump in because we're all trying to make space for each other.
So it's kind of cool that in the gospel, the women were actually named this time around. So Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, Shana, Joanne, and Rachel, and Shaniqua.
Let me ask one more question about Exodus, and then I'll switch us to the gospel. What metaphorical sea needs to be parted in our world right now? And then the other question would be which is similar, what do we as a society need to cross in order to be free? So they're kind of the same, but
I want to say like the sea of like propriety. I don't know. I don't know if that's my final answer, but that is the first thing that hits. Like sometimes, like like we were just talking about. Sometimes in certain circles, I find myself sitting on my hands a little bit more, like tempering my voice a little bit more, because I am worried about like maybe cultural norms or even like societal norms, and like ways I might be outcast if I toe over certain lines of propriety. Um, I don't know if that's the sea or if that's the land that we need to cross. I don't know, but propriety is somewhere in my answer.
My husband, I'm in a situation right now where I'm trying to effect some change and advocate for myself. And the community around that change keeps changing the rules. And I'm trying really hard to honor the rules and to do what's right. And what's right keeps changing. My husband, who's a white man, has started calling it toxic propriety. And it is just, man, it is on the money, because it's the propriety, right? I keep trying to do things the proper way. And I finally sent an email this week to the whole group saying, okay, I'm going to need to know what proper procedure is, because I keep ending up in the wrong place. But I've been thinking about this question about what we're trying to get through. What's the C that we're trying to get through? And I'm not sure what the C is, but I feel like what's chasing us is social media and division, like the story of division that we keep telling ourselves, how we're so far apart, and the right and the left, and the way that story keeps driving us further apart. And I imagine that different people tell this story differently. There are different people at the front of this running than there are at the back. And depending on who you identify with, there's the chasers are a different group, right? But we're trying to outrun the division, but we're making more division in the process. And it just keeps getting worse. We just keep piling it on. And that makes me really sad. This is an opportunity for us to come together. And social media, the news media, I mean, what sells is that division, the big story of division and fighting. And that's what's interesting, not the people who are coming together.
I think to me, it's similar. One of the things that I worry about when I preach in different churches, which I've been doing recently, is that I'm afraid that I'm going to offend someone. And is something that I say going to be offensive to X, Y, and Z? Is it going to cause further division within this congregation that I am preaching to? But also that answering a call to be leading through with my preaching, and how it really can cast vision, and I hope and pray inspires people to action in certain ways that are merciful to those who are suffering.
I was thinking a little bit about, like, Rachel, you talked about propriety, and I was thinking about like this idea that we always have to be facing forward. And I think like sometimes the answers can actually be in our past, right? Like if we look at right now where we are, what's happening in the church right now is very similar, maybe, or at least what's happening in our world right now with empire and all of that is very similar to what was happening way in the past, right? And sometimes the answers that we can have if we draw back from the strength of our cultures and our ancestors, and how did they organize in those times, and how did they survive, and what were the things that they did. And I think sometimes we only think that the answer is going to be in this piece of technology or in this new idea, and it's like sometimes what's old is new. I don't know if that's a C to be parted, or like what you said, Rachel, a C to be parted or the thing to be crossed, but I think that's somewhere in there too.
I think another piece of that too is that this idea that somehow we're past that. We've done that. And the thing that really jumped out at me as I was re-looking at these readings is it's still so hard. Like somehow we've gotten past it. We've done it. We can look back at history where we've done it over and over and over again. And I want it to be easy, and it's not, and it's so frustrating. How could it be this hard again, right? And I think in this way that people of color have something to offer to people who have more privilege, because we have experience with the expectation that things are going to be easier than they are. And they are not that easy for people of color, or for people who have other underprivileged experiences of the world. It's just not easy. And for me, that's particularly frustrating when I hit it. I'm like, you're kidding. You're kidding. How come it's so hard?
Now, we have that particular grace of being able to draw from our ancestral stories. That is, um, so that we can learn from them, as you said, Shana, and also, as we mentioned earlier, this having this communion of saints that feel that are, you know, behind us and praying for and with us.
Let me move us over to the gospel. I'll start with this one, and I'm going to mess up his name, I think. Jürgen Moltmann said, without women preachers, we would have no knowledge of the resurrection. What does it mean that it is the women who first learned of Jesus's resurrection?
Shana, I wonder if after that retreat that we had, if you had some other insights, the one for the women clergy.
There's some piece of this, going back to what I said about people of color and the experience of hard, that there's something about the way that women experience the story or the world that I think made them more open to the unimaginable. And there's lots of ways that women experience. I mean, we experience that bodily with when you have a baby. It's like, what? How? First, there's this moment where you have a live being inside your body that is independent of you, and then you give birth to this separate human being. So we have some connection with the unimaginable in a way that maybe men, I don't want to say that men can't, because they really can. But I can imagine a case for the way that women are allowed to grieve, the way that women are allowed to feel things, the way that we're expected to take care of each other. And so, of course, it was women who went. In that, like, you know, when you're grieving, you bring a casserole. I'm so sorry that your mom died. Here's some food, right? The really practical and like logistical support of that moment.
In one of our previous episodes, it was several seasons ago or a couple, but we had talked about love languages, and someone was like, as people of color, they need to recognize that food is a love language. Like, that's what we do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe one of the miracles of the story is that eventually the women were believed. They weren't just written off as hysterical females.
Yeah, and in a way, the women were able to get into a place and space that the men were not able to in this story. Because of that, you know, the story of the resurrection was able to spread. And in many ways, there are places and spaces in our hearts and minds and souls where the story is not absorbed by us so easily.
I'm also wondering about the women being the first to receive the good news, thinking of the women not just as like gendered women, but like there's the concept of yin and yang, yin and yang, where yin is typically like the feminine energy. It's like the quieter energy, like the softer energy, the receptive energy, um, versus the yang, which is like the aggressive energy. So something about like everybody having the ability within them. everyone has access to that energy, like to be able to receive something, right?
I was thinking in our culture, women are usually like, they bring life. And so, of course, they'd be the ones to talk about this resurrection. We also think about like, they're usually the ones, well, I guess just like in this story, they'll often care for the body and wash it and things like that. And so they would see it. In what ways do we look for living among the dead? And I'm sure I'm saying some sort of heretical thing here, but I think not that the church is dead necessarily, but I think as churches, when we're talking about growth and renewal and all of that, we always look internally. We're like, oh, we have these red doors and our liturgy is so beautiful and people are just going to come. I'm like, no, get our butts out of the church. That is how we build the church. And so that's how I see like us looking for the living among the dead. And maybe among the dead is not the right phrase there, but like I definitely think that's a thing.
First thing that comes to my mind is in terms of like old archetypes of who would make a good leader in these times. I feel like we keep acknowledging that these problems that particularly affect the margins but keep making their way towards the center are somehow still going to be solved by people who were formed in the center. But for whatever reason, I see like a deep resistance toward like trusting people who were formed on the margins. So like that feels like that. Like we've tried that before and it hasn't worked. Like maybe we trust leadership who visited the margins for like 3 years or, visited enough to write a book on their experience in the margins. But like, what would it look like if we actually took a risk and invested in a different kind of leader?
My thought is that sometimes we're not sure what's alive and what's dead. And I think
Right.
that sometimes we're just not looking, and sometimes we are seeing and hearing, but don't want to accept that there is grieving involved with the loss that we are not facing, and suddenly we are sitting among the dead. However, you want to interpret that around church and liturgy and leadership is up to you. Uh, but perhaps discernment is the key there.
Something that popped into my head when you were talking is my friend had a pet frog for a while, and she lived in Alaska, and the pet frog died in the wintertime. And so she took the pet frog out to bury it outside. And when she got outside, it naturally contracted. And so here's this frog that was dead a minute ago that's now moving. And so she's like, oh my God. And she takes it back and puts it back in the tank. Like, I was wrong. I was wrong. And then a couple days later, she's like, no, it's really dead. And she takes it outside. And again, it contracts. And so, it's this, and I think about the ways that the church keeps like, oh, okay, it's dead. And then we take it outside and we're like, oh, it contracted. It's okay. It's alive. And so we bring it back inside as if it's still alive, and it's just not. And we don't have it's hard to have imagination for something that is time to let go of, especially when it was so vibrant and wonderful at a time. Man, the 60s were great for this program.
Right. What's something you wish was resurrected?
Have you ever spent time? You all have. We all have. You know that person that oh God, what is it called when somebody converts? You know when you spend time with somebody who is just converted, that zeal that as a leader often drives me crazy, but that energetic conversion that's happened. There was a time in the early church when everyone was that. Everyone had that energetic zeal, and it got lived out differently, right? Not everybody lives it a certain way, but I wish, and maybe that's a fantasy too, but I wish that we all came to God with that kind of energetic zeal.
Maybe this sounds a little old-fashioned, but that religious being at church on Sunday thing, where people didn't schedule things at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings, because that gathering, is a place where the body of Christ comes together in a particular way, where we experience the Eucharist together, and that coffee hour is such a place, where we're forming relationships, and Jesus is present in a particular way there. Not that he's not present in other places, but there's this particular thing that happens when we gather together on a Sunday.
You mentioned the Eucharist, Joanne, and that just reminds me of like communal spaces in general, like shared tables, right? Shared tables, shared gatherings. I feel like, I don't know if this is just my experience, but back in the day, I feel like people used to like make time to get together with neighbors more, or at least they used to know their neighbors more. But now I feel like we have so many options to like not know our neighbors, or to like not go to certain gatherings, that I sometimes I wonder if we've lost our ability to connect like we used to. Um, but in the times that we're in, like being able to connect with one another is just, it's so important. I feel like it's only going to get increasingly more important. So I feel like I wish we could resurrect like that, the prioritization of the community, and of be like, I wish we could resurrect our dealing with each other, even when we're not perfect, even when we're messy, even when we don't necessarily get along.
That kinship relationship.
Yes.
It makes me think about my mom is an immigrant, and this is true for a lot of immigrant churches, where her church after church has a full lunch. Like they would never think to do the donuts and coffee, or just coffee. Like, why? The really important thing for her and for immigrant churches in many cases is the gathering, right? And to be with people who are having the same experience that you are. And it is just as much Eucharist in the parish hall as it is in church.
And that's something that our ethnic churches tend to have in common. I've seen a couple now, in our different Asian ethnic churches, is that people come from far and wide to be with one another in that ethnic church. There are some Filipino churches that I'm a bit more familiar with, in Iowa and outside of LA, where people come to attend services in the morning and they stay all day, and they have at least one, if not two, full meals. They spend the afternoon together. Either, there's a celebration sometimes, other times there's not, and people are around and eating and cooking, and the kids are playing together, and ostensibly they grow up together that way. And then after dinner, they go home.
Yeah, church becomes a place where you meet other people. I think as a kid, where we are exposed to home culture, right? This is how I learned who Korean people are. This is how I learned how to be Korean in some ways.
I was thinking about a couple of things. One, I remember, there's like two different, there's probably more than two, but there's like two different ideas of time. And one is like very Western centered, where, church is going to start at 10. And then the other kind of time is it's like people centered. So we start church when the right people are there, right? And I think a lot of our communities that are collectivistic do that, right? Like you have to wait till the Grandma Opal, you can't start church until Grandma Opal gets there, and she might not get there until, 10:15, and you just kind of got to wait. And there's that, but then I also was like remembering as a kid, one of the things that I really loved about, I grew up Orthodox for a period of time, is that like after the Easter Vigil, there was usually like this huge feast because all the people who hadn't been eating meat or dairy products, and they're just like bring all their favorite foods, and I mean you just eat it till you know, just are so full, and then you regret it because you're all swollen the next day because you ate too much salt. But anyway, but I just remember that being wonderful. And last weekend I went and preached at a UCC church, and they had like whatever, an 8 and a 10 or whatever it was. Between those two services, they have a full-on breakfast, and I mean like scrambled eggs, bacon, pancakes, donuts, cereal, fresh fruit. I mean, it's the whole spread, and it's anybody who's there can come. And so the people who just finished church can come, and they're having Eucharist, like you said, with the folks who are about to be there for that. And there's like families, and you know, it was beautiful. And I was like, how the heck do you afford that? And they're like, that's just something that we are committed to. And I was like, that's beautiful.
Are y'all familiar with Joyce Del Rosario potluck theology? Okay, there's this contemporary Filipina-American theologian named Dr. Joyce Del Rosario, located on the West Coast. So shout out to the West Coast. But she has this theory called potluck theology, where essentially it's where everybody kind of brings their best to the table in order to co-create a meal that's for the community. And I remember I was in an Asian American women's cohort, and we were reflecting on how the potlucks we've been a part of can sometimes be different from other potlucks, maybe from like non-ethnic churches. There's this thing that we had like don't bring your bag of Ralph's chips to the table when
Right.
like I've been spending like my entire day like cooking this homemade chili for you or something. So, and granted, sometimes buying the bag of chips from Ralph's is the best that we have to offer. But anyway, it's just this concept of like sharing the best of ourselves for the wholeness of the community.
What do you think, or what are some good news that we are called to share today?
Asian women.
Awesome. Yes.
Absolutely.
Asian women cooking and not just sitting at the table.
I mean, getting my mom to sit at the table that's its own problem, right? She's cooking and bringing stuff, and she's irritated if we wait. She's like, God, eat. It's going to get cold, right?
Which is funny because my Asian mom doesn't cook. So maybe that's why I think about it.
One of the things that really jumped out at me as I was looking through the readings for this call is everything is about love, right? It's God created us in love, and God saved us with love. And there's the obedience of Abraham and Isaac, right? Abraham is obedient, which is a kind of love, and then God rewards it. So every story in the arc of the Easter Vigil stories is about love, 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 love. And that is what I think, well, I mean, really in many ways, all of Holy Scripture is always pointing us toward God is love. And our job is to reflect that, to amplify that to the communities that we meet in a world that really, really needs love. We need community, we need love, we need connection, and we've already been given all of it. It's already ours, and it is just ours to share.
To me, what I'm seeing is all about going from this darkness into this light. Whether it's that darkness of the death, to a darkness of a liminal space, where there are little specks of light, whether that is joy or courage or hope, and that amplifies into the brightness of the light of the kingdom of God. That this place that we're in now is not the final word.
I had a parishioner in my last church who was a midwife, and I had my babies by C-section, so I didn't ever have this experience, but she talked about transition. It's a part of labor. And she said, there's this moment when a woman is in labor where women just, it's too painful and they just want to give up. Like, just stop, stop, stop. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm hurting so much. I can't do anymore. Please get me the drugs, all of that. Right. And she said the hardest part in that moment is the partners, and the partners who are looking to the midwife, like, please fix it. I mean, she's in total, this is awful. And please help her. Please help her. You have the tools. Please do something. And she talked about how that is the moment right before the baby's born, usually. And hopefully it's a moment and not ours. But I think about that for us. This moment that feels like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. Like, make it stop, make it stop. Whatever is going on, please, 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 just forget it, forget it, forget it. And I hope that we're right before something new is born.
I was thinking about, as you were talking, to in our culture, we do this thing called a sweat lodge, which is kind of like a dark sauna, if that makes sense. It's like a prayerful time, but it represents being reborn. And so I was kind of thinking of that, like you're going into that darkness and you pray and you heal and all of that. And then you're coming out into the light, reborn, trying to, do all the things that you need to do. And go back into whatever it is. And sometimes when you're in there, it is hot, and sometimes you feel like you're like, I need to open that door. I need to get my butt out. My prayers are done. But what tips do you have on preaching Easter Vigil? And one question I have for y'all that you can answer while you answer that is, should you do one sermon, or the rubrics also say you could do like little mini sermons after each of those readings and after the gospel? What are your suggestions?
I'm always less is more. As it is, we're having within our staff a conversation about, do we even need a sermon at the Easter Vigil? Like, after people have heard all these stories. But I think the short of this is tell the story. My Easter sermon, I always feel so torn about this, because if you read the scripture, it's a moment of like hope, but it's also just pure fear. It's a really scary story at this point, and a real story of grief. And yet you have all these people who come to church twice a year. And is that the story you want to tell them? Don't you want to tell them the full resurrection story of, look what happens? But that instant, that first morning is actually a really scary and sad moment for these folks who are just learning, like, oh my gosh, this is the story. So tell the story and make it just one story. Don't say all the things.
To me, and we preach to ourselves first, right? So I feel like I'm telling myself to be of good courage, to stretch out that hand and tell the Israelites to move forward, exercise that leadership that you're called to have at that moment, at that time. And I like to hear a lot of voices, not in a, when hearing all these different readings and the different reflections. You never know whose heart is going to be touched by what.
I love the idea of co-creating, like, multiple voices as well. Love getting like different perspectives. And I think I always just lean towards sermons that feel relatable. Like, love when people can get into like the details of what words mean, and the etymology of things. Like, I do love preaching that comes from a headspace. But I think in these times, people, well, I really am hungering to hear preaching that can relate scripture, the messages from scripture, into like, what does that mean for us, and what does that mean for us in our times. So relatability and relevancy, I think, those feel like two important words for me to keep in mind while preaching.
In the past previous episode, I don't remember what it was, but Jazzy Bostic from Hawaii, who's an indigenous Hawaiian, and she had said at moments when things are rough, there's like this saying in Hawaiian, and it means turn your hands down. And it kind of means like continue doing the work. And what I was thinking about was it's when the women are doing their work of caring for this body that's just part of their regular work that they're doing, even though they're filled with grief, even though they've had all these struggles. It's when they do their work that they encounter the risen Christ at that moment, or that they encounter the resurrection and learn that story. And I was thinking about maybe that might be what the tip that I'm thinking about at this time. But I also thought about having like asking different members of the congregation to like whatever stories you read, whether you read all of them or 2 or 5 or whatever, but like picking like a little preacher. Not that maybe sounds diminutive, but like picking a preacher that's going to be just like, 2 or 3 sentences of like, what did I get? What does it mean to me and how? And then boom. That might be an idea. Thank you so much for being willing to be guests on the podcast. I am so appreciative of your wisdom and your stories and your thoughts and all of that. And I know our listeners are appreciative too. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, indeed.
If you want to learn more about Beloved Community, visit episcopalchurch.org/beloved-community. Thanks to our guests, Joanne, Shana, and Rachel. Thanks also to our production team, especially Michael and Asma. If you felt resurrection today, please rate, review, and of course, share our podcast. Until next time, let your light shine.
Do justice. Love mercy. These words echo through our tradition not just as an action, but as a way of life. At Episcopal Service Corps, we invite young adults to explore what a life of justice and mercy looks like for them. Whether that's on a farm in Michigan, in a classroom in Philadelphia, or at a nonprofit in the Wyoming Rockies. Our 7 programs across the country offer service opportunities ranging from 6 months to 2 years in length, with stipends and other benefits provided. Live, learn, and worship in a community of young adult peers while serving at justice-seeking churches and nonprofits. If you're looking for a place to grow in your faith and live out your values, consider ESC. Learn more today at episcopalservicecorps.org or on social media at Episcopal Service Corps.